Hey everyone, it's Arjun, CEO of Doula, and in today's video, I'm going to break down what the best state is to form your LLC in. There's a ton of confusing information out there on what truly is the best state to form your LLC in. And if you've gotten to this video, you've probably done some research on your own. And you're probably thinking, is it Delaware? Is it Wyoming? Is it New York? Is it Florida? Or is it none of them? And is it a separate state which I have not mentioned yet? Well, in this video, I'm going to break down truly what the best state is if you are a US resident versus if you are a non-US resident. I'm also going to go through some of the pros and cons of choosing different states, and I'm also ultimately going to give you a recommendation. The first thing is understanding what the best state to form in is if you are a US resident versus a non-US resident. And the answer is it's actually different depending on where you live. Let's take the non-US resident first. If you live outside of the United States, you can actually form an LLC in any of the 50 United States. There is no restriction or requirement on what state you can form in. Well, the next logical question would be, if I can form in all 50 states, what is the best state to form in? Oftentimes we see the two most popular states are Delaware and Wyoming. And this is for a few reasons. As a non-US resident, you can choose any state. And other factors that then come into play are things like cost to the state and anonymity. Anonymity is important because when you submit a filing to the state to form your LLC, there are certain states that will actually put your personal information on the public record. Many business owners don't want this. They want to protect their personal information. The good news is Delaware and Wyoming both offer anonymous LLC filings, meaning when you form the LLC, you can put the registered agent's information on the state listing, not your personal information. In terms of whether or not you should choose Delaware or Wyoming, it really comes down to a few things. Delaware has a lot of prestige. The most Fortune 500 companies in the US are based in Delaware. And Delaware actually is the home of the most companies in the US in terms of LLCs. However, Delaware has an annual franchise fee or annual franchise tax to the state of $300. Compare that to Wyoming. Not many people know, but the first LLC was actually invented and created in Wyoming. Some call Wyoming the Swiss Alps of the Rockies. Wyoming also offers very proactive legislation and is great for e-commerce businesses and online digital businesses. Furthermore, the annual fee to the state in Wyoming is only $60. If you're doing the math there, that means you pay $240 less per year if you form your LLC in Wyoming versus forming it in Delaware. So, if you want an actual recommendation from me, the answer is it's your business, your choice. But when you're starting a business, every dollar matters. So if you're truly looking to optimize costs, you can't go wrong with Wyoming as a non-US resident, where you'll pay that $60 to the state each year. However, if the prestige does matter, and if to your customer base, saying you have a Delaware LLC can make a difference, then that matters, and you can form an LLC in Delaware. Now, we've covered what the best state is to form in as a non-US resident. To summarize, it's typically Delaware or Wyoming. Delaware is great for prestige. Wyoming is great for online digital businesses, especially e-commerce businesses, and has a lower annual cost to the state. What if you are a US resident? If you are a US resident, what is the best state to form your LLC in? The answer is not Delaware. The answer is not Wyoming. It's not New York. It's not Florida. It's not Texas. The answer is, as a US resident, the best state to form your LLC in is the state you live in. And the reason for that is the state you live in, where you are physically located, is by default the state you are doing business in. That means if you are sitting at a desk or have physical office space or have employees in the state, you have a physical presence and therefore you are doing business in that state. The downside of forming an LLC in a state you do not live in, if you are a US resident, is you actually have to end up paying fees in two states. Let's break this down as an example. I live in New York City, and let's say I decided to form an LLC in Delaware. I form the LLC in Delaware, I get a registered agent, and each year I have to pay the annual Delaware franchise tax of $300. However, because I live in New York City and am doing business here, I also have to get a registered agent in New York, and every year pay the state fee in New York as well. So my decision to form an LLC in Delaware actually meant that I ended up having to pay fees in 2 states. Instead, if I had formed my LLC in New York, I would have an LLC in New York, and I would only have to pay fees in this state. Now, that doesn't mean you can't form an LLC in another state. You actually might be required to do so. Let's say you have employees in another state. Or let's say you have a physical presence or are opening a store or a warehouse physically located in another state. In that case, what you can do is file what's called a foreign qualification, which effectively allows your LLC to do business in that state. It registers your LLC to be compliant and recognized by the state to do business in that specific state where you foreign qualify. But to recap, if you live in the United States, I recommend forming an LLC in the state you live in. And if you need to foreign qualify to do business in other states, you can submit a foreign qualification. To summarize, if you are a non-US resident, you can choose any state in the US to form your LLC in. Typically, the top 2 choices are Wyoming and Delaware. And if you're really looking for a recommendation, I recommend Wyoming because it's cheaper than the state fees that you would pay in Delaware, and you still get all the benefits in terms of limited liability protection, the ability to get an EIN, which enables you to open a US business bank account, and more. If you live in the United States, my recommendation is to form an LLC in the state that you live in so that you can avoid paying fees in multiple states. And the best part is, whether you form in Wyoming or Delaware, you can do an anonymous LLC filing. And if you're filing in another state, make sure to check if you can do an anonymous filing. And if you can, make sure to select that the registered agent's information is going on the state's record. Thank you so much for listening. And if you have any more questions about what is the best state to form an LLC in, please do let us know, and we're happy to record more content.